Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a bit to unpack today. You all have sent in some, well, let's be honest, kind of alarming stuff about plastics.
Yeah, it's a big topic. We've got a lot of different angles here. Legal stuff, cultural stuff, even just like basic information or misinformation about how plastic affects us and the planet.
Right. So our aim today is to kind of, sift through all of that, help you guys make sense of it.
Exactly. Sort of like a big puzzle. We've got all the pieces from your research, and in this deep dive, we'll try to put it together, so you walk away with a clearer picture of the whole plastic problem.
The whole plastic problem. Okay, well, let's dive in. I guess the first thing is, when did plastic really become like the main thing? Like everywhere you look, it's plastic, plastic, plastic. When did that happen?
Well, it really seems like the turning point was the middle of the 20th century.
Okay, so like the 1950s, 1960s.
Yeah, right around then. And your sources, they really emphasize how plastic was initially seen as this miracle material. I mean, think about it. It was cheap to make, lasted forever, could be shaped into anything. It was appealing on so many levels.
Yeah, I can see that. From a business point of view, you'd be saving a lot of money. And
Mm.
for us as consumers, well, it just makes things easier, right? Like plastic packaging.
Yeah.
Lighter than those old glass bottles, often cheaper. And back then, I bet it felt more, I don't know, hygienic or something.
Right. But the interesting thing is, and this comes out in a lot of the stuff you send in, the long-term consequences. No one really seemed to be thinking about that back then.
Yeah, all those milk jugs and plastic bags, where does it all go? I guess they weren't really worried about that in those early days.
And it took a while for those concerns to really come to the surface. It wasn't until the 1970s that people started to get really worried about plastic waste, at least on a wider scale.
But even then, it doesn't sound like the industry was super eager to, like, sound the alarm bell.
No, definitely not. And the sources you sent in, they really paint a picture of an industry that was downplaying those concerns, even as they were becoming more and more obvious.
So they knew there was a problem, but they didn't really want to talk about it.
It seems that way. And if we fast forward to today, it's mind-blowing how much plastic we're actually producing now. One of the documents you sent mentioned over 300 million tons every year. That's just an insane amount of plastic.
Yeah, it's hard to even picture that, you know? And it's not just like giant piles of trash anymore, is it? It feels like plastic is just everywhere in ways we don't even realize.
Exactly. Your sources are pretty clear about that. Plastic is in our food, in our water, even in the air we breathe. And this brings us to another really important point that comes up in the research you sent, the health effects.
Yeah, this is where things start to get a little, well, scary, to be honest. The idea that all this plastic around us could actually be affecting our health, that's pretty unsettling.
It is. And there's a growing body of evidence that suggests a link between plastic and various health problems.
Really? Like what kind of problems?
One of the articles you sent in, it talked about microplastics being found in human blood, lungs, even in placentas.
Whoa, hold on. Placentas, that's pretty disturbing.
It is. And these tiny plastic particles, they're showing up in all these really vital parts of the human body. Scientists are still trying to figure out the long-term health consequences.
So, given all these environmental problems and potential health risks, what should governments be doing about all this? Shouldn't there be like stricter regulations?
That's a key question, and it comes up again and again in the materials you sent in. There's definitely a responsibility for governments to step in and manage both the production of new plastic and, of course, deal with all the plastic waste we already have.
I mean, we've seen some countries take action, right? The European Union, for example, they banned certain single-use plastics.
Yeah, the EU banning things like plastic straws and cutlery, that's a pretty big deal. It shows that at least some governments are taking this issue seriously.
Right. But a lot of the sources you sent in also point out that not everyone is following suit. A lot of places, especially here in the US, seem to be pretty slow in enacting similar regulations. Why is that?
Well, from what your research suggests, a big part of it is the power of the plastics industry. They've got a lot of influence, and they've been spending a lot of money lobbying against any laws that would make them more accountable for, the entire life cycle of their products.
So it's this battle, basically. On one side, you've got corporate profits, and on the other side, you've got, well, the health of the planet and the people on it.
Exactly. It's a clash of priorities.
Yeah,
One of your sources put it really well. Profits over people and the planet.
yeah, that sums it up pretty well. And that leads to another issue that your research highlights: the ethics of information, or maybe the lack of information.
Right. How much responsibility do these big companies have to be honest with us, with the public, about the potential dangers of their products?
Yeah, I mean, for years, the message has been recycle, 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 and that's great, but it feels like the plastic industry has been using that as a way to kind of, shift the blame.
It's been a very effective way to shape public opinion. But the reality, and this is something your sources emphasize, is that recycling alone isn't enough, not by a long shot.
Right. One of the statistics that really jumped out at me was that only about 9% of plastic actually gets recycled.
9%.
That's it.
So where does all the rest of it go? Landfills, incinerators, or straight into the environment?
So all those plastic bottles we carefully rinse out and put in the blue bin, a lot of them aren't actually ending up where we think they are.
Unfortunately not. And this gap between what the industry has been telling us and what's actually happening, well, one of the sources you sent in described it as a massive cover-up.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is, but it really captures that sense of, I don't know, potential deception. Like, did these companies know about these problems all along? And if they did, why weren't they more upfront about it?
It's kind of similar to what happened with the tobacco industry, or even with fossil fuels. They knew the risks, but they downplayed them for years. And now we're all dealing with the consequences. And this whole plastic problem, it's not just about industry and government, is it? It's also about us, about our culture, how we live our lives.
Absolutely. Culture plays a huge role. Your sources make a really good point about how plastic has become intertwined with our ideas of convenience and, well, just plain consumerism.
Right, like we've been kind of, I don't know, trained to think that single-use plastics are totally normal. Grab a coffee, get a plastic lid and straw, buy a sandwich, it comes wrapped in plastic, it's everywhere.
And that's the challenge, right? To break out of that mindset. But the good news is, and your forces point this out too, there seems to be a shift happening, especially among younger people. They're much more aware of the problem and actively looking for alternatives. Zero waste living, sustainable products, that kind of thing.
That's encouraging. But is it enough? Can individual actions really make a difference on a global scale?
That's the big question, isn't it? And while those individual efforts are really important, your sources are pretty clear that we need more than that. We need system-wide change.
Mm.
Governments, businesses, and individuals all working together.
So it's not just about being good little recyclers, although that's still important. It's about rethinking our whole relationship with plastic, how we make it, how we use it, what happens to it after we're done with it.
Exactly. And your research offers some potential solutions. One idea is to go back to older, more sustainable materials, like, remember glass milk bottles, metal containers. Those might actually make a comeback.
Yeah, those old school milk bottles were pretty cool. And what about those new biodegradable plastics? Are those a viable solution?
There's definitely a lot of research and development going into those. They can be part of the solution, but we need to make sure they're truly biodegradable and that they don't create other problems down the line.
Right, we don't want to swap one problem for another. But one thing that's crystal clear from all of your research is that the way we're using plastic now, it's just not sustainable. If we keep going down this path, things are going to get a lot worse.
Yeah, that's undeniable. We've uncovered a really complicated web of problems here. Environmental damage, potential health hazards, legal battles, and deeply ingrained cultural habits. It's a lot to untangle.
It really is. This whole deep dive has been pretty eye-opening, to be honest,
Hmm.
and the stakes are incredibly high. So, as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a couple of questions to ponder. First, just on a personal level, what changes are you willing to make in your own life to reduce your reliance on plastic? Every little bit helps, as they say.
And looking beyond our individual choices, what kind of bigger changes do you think are needed? What can governments do? What kind of innovation do we need from industry? What needs to shift in our culture as a whole?
These are big questions, but they're important ones. So keep thinking about this issue. Keep digging deeper into the information we've talked about today. And most importantly, keep talking about it. Because the future of our planet might just depend on how we answer these questions. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.